I'm 70 years old, and I finally retired. People think retirement is about freedom. It isn't. Retirement is about becoming available. That's the difference. When I was working, nobody could find me. Now, everybody knows exactly where I am. My phone rings. "Dad, are you home?" "Yes." "Good." That's never good. Nobody calls a retired man because they have good news. Nobody says, "Dad, we're calling to tell you we don't need anything." That's not a phone call. That's a miracle. My wife was the first person to understand what retirement really meant. I told her, "I'm retiring next Friday." She smiled. "That's wonderful." I said, "I'm finally going to relax." She said, "Of course." Then she looked away. I should have known. I asked, "What?" "Nothing." "What are you thinking?" "Nothing." I've been married 42 years. I know that face. That wasn't nothing. That was a woman mentally reorganizing the entire house. I retired on Friday. Monday morning, my wife knocked on the bedroom door. "Frank? Yeah? Are you awake?" I said, "I'm retired." She said, "I know. So why are you waking me up?" "I thought you'd be up." "Why?" "You don't work anymore." I said, "Exactly." She said, "It's 9:30. I opened my eyes. 9:30? "Yes." I said, "That's early." She stared at me. I said, "What?" "You've been awake since 6. "How do you know?" "Because you were making coffee." "So?" "You've been sitting downstairs for 3 hours." I said, "That's retirement." She said, "You've done nothing." I said, "Exactly." She shook her head. Then she said the sentence that destroyed my entire retirement. "Since you're home now." I said, "No." She hadn't even finished. "No what?" "No whatever comes after that." She laughed. "Since you're home now, there are a few things I'd like you to look at." "Look at?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because you've got time." That's another dangerous phrase. You've got time. People say that to retired men like we're an unused government employee. My wife handed me a list. I looked at it. I said, "What is this?" "Just some things." "Some things?" "Yes." The list had 12 pages. I said, "This isn't a list." "What is it?" "An estate plan." She laughed. At the top, garage. Fine. Then, basement. Okay. Then, attic. No. Nobody should enter an attic at 70. An attic is where houses store evidence. I said, "What am I supposed to do in the attic?" "Clean it." "Why?" "It's been years." "Exactly." "Exactly what?" "If we haven't needed anything up there in 20 years, we don't need it now." She said, "That's not how it works." I said, "What is up there?" She thought. "Old Christmas decorations." "We don't celebrate Christmas upstairs." "Old photographs." "We have photographs downstairs." "Your old clothes." "I haven't worn them in 20 years." "That's why they're upstairs." I said, "So the attic is basically a museum of things nobody wants." She said, "That's one way to look at it." I said, "That's the only way to look at it." Then she pointed to the garage. "There's another thing." "What?" "The shelves." "What about them?" "They're leaning." I said, "They've been leaning for 12 years." "I know." "And they're still standing." "Yes." "So why touch them?" "Because they're leaning." I said, "Maybe that's how they like to stand." My wife looked at me. I looked at her. She said, "You're going to be difficult." I said, "I've been difficult for 42 years." She smiled. "That's true." That's marriage. You reach an age where insults become historical facts. I thought retirement would mean sleeping late. It didn't. I thought I'd watch television. I do. But now my wife says, "Are you going to sit there all day?" I say, "Yes." She says, "Why?" "Because I'm retired." She says, "You could do something." I say, "I am." "What?" "Watching television." She says, "That's not doing something." I say, "Tell that to the people who make television." She walked away. 5 minutes later, she came back. "Frank?" "Yeah?" "Can you take the trash out?" I said, "I'm retired." She said, "Trash doesn't know that." That's when I realized something. I hadn't retired. I had changed employers. My new employer was my wife. The salary was zero. The benefits were questionable. And the performance reviews were weekly. I have 2 adult children. I love them. I raised them. I fed them. I clothed them. I paid for things I didn't understand. I helped them move twice. And now they're adults, which means they have jobs, cars, mortgages, responsibilities, and apparently, me. The first week of retirement, my daughter called. "Dad?" "Yes?" "What are you doing?" "Nothing." She said, "Perfect." I said, "Why is that perfect?" "Can you help me with something?" There it was, the retirement hotline. I said, "What?" "My printer isn't working." I said, "Why are you calling me?" "You're good with computers." I said, "No, I'm not." "You fixed my Wi-Fi." I unplugged it. It worked. That's not computer expertise. She said, "Dad, can you come over?" I said, "I just retired." "Exactly." I said, "Why does everyone think retirement means I'm a technician?" She said, "Because you're home." That's the new definition of retirement. Available. I went over. Her printer wasn't working. I looked at it. I pressed a button. Nothing. I unplugged it, plugged it back in. It worked. My daughter looked at me like I had performed surgery. "Dad!" "What?" "You fixed it!" "No." "What?" "I restarted it." "That's fixing it." "No. That's giving it a second chance." She laughed. I went home. The next day, my son called. "Dad?" "What?" "Do you know anything about cars?" I said, "No." "You used to work on cars." "When I was 30. "So?" "So my body was 30. He said, "My car's making a noise." "What kind of noise?" "Like a clicking." I said, "Where?" "Under the hood." "Then take it to a mechanic." "Can you just look at it?" "No." "Why?" "Because I'm retired." He laughed. "You don't have anything to do." I said, "That's exactly why I don't want to do anything." He said, "Come on, Dad." So I went. He started the car. Click, click, click. I opened the hood. I looked inside. I saw wires, belts, metal, things I didn't recognize. I said, "Yep." He said, "What?" "That's definitely a car." He laughed. I said, "Take it to a mechanic." He said, "You're useless." I said, "That's the first honest performance review I've received since retirement." Then my grandchildren got involved. Grandchildren are wonderful. They don't ask you to fix things. They assume you can. My grandson came over with his phone. "Grandpa, can you fix this?" "What happened?" "I don't know." "What does it do?" "Nothing." I looked at it. I said, "Have you tried turning it off?" He looked at me. "Grandpa." "What?" "That's old." I said, "It's been working for me since 1956. He laughed. I said, "Try it." He did. It worked. He looked at me. "How did you know?" I said, "Because everything in life needs a break." He said, You're weird. I said, I've been married 42 years. I know things. Then he showed me AI. He said, Grandpa, look. He opened an AI app. I said, what is that? Artificial intelligence. I said, I have a wife. He looked confused. I said, she already tells me what to do. He laughed. I asked, what does AI do? It can answer questions. Any question? Almost. I said, can it tell me what my wife is thinking? No. Then it's not intelligent enough. He laughed. I asked, can it fix the printer? Yes. I said, then I hate it. He said, why? Because now your generation doesn't need me. He laughed. I said, don't worry. What? Your mother will still need me to open jars. That's one job AI hasn't taken. Yet. My granddaughter asked, Grandpa, do you use ChatGPT? I said, no. She said, why? I said, because I have Google. She said, that's not the same thing. I said, it's all the same to me. She said, do you use Facebook? Yes. Instagram? No. TikTok? No. Why? I've already lived long enough. She laughed. But here's the thing. I actually like technology. I just don't like the attitude. Everything wants to help me now. My phone wants to remind me. My watch wants to monitor me. My refrigerator wants to tell me what I ate. My car wants to tell me how to drive. My television wants to ask if I'm still watching. Yes, I'm still watching. Mind your business. I watched television for 40 years without it asking me questions. Now, every 20 minutes, are you still watching? Yes, if I weren't, I'd be doing something else. That's how television works. Then my watch tells me, stand up. I say, I know. It says, you've been inactive. I say, I'm retired. My watch doesn't care. It has no sympathy. I bought a smartwatch. Now I have a tiny supervisor on my wrist. It knows my heart rate, my steps, my sleep, my stress, my location, my activity. My wife says, that's good. I say, no. She says, why? Because now there are two of you. After 42 years of marriage, my wife has become very efficient. She doesn't ask. She assigns. Frank, can you do this? Frank, don't forget that. Frank, we're leaving at 2. Frank, did you call the plumber? Frank, did you pay the bill? Frank, where did you put the scissors? I say, I don't know. She says, you moved them. How do you know? Because nobody else moved them. I said, that's circumstantial evidence. She said, where are they? I said, I don't know. She says, look in the kitchen. I look. Nothing. Bathroom? Nothing. Garage? Nothing. Then she finds them. On the table. Right in front of me. She says, Frank. I say, I was testing you. She says, stop. I love marriage. Marriage teaches you something. When you're young, you want somebody who makes you feel butterflies. When you're 70, you want somebody who knows where the scissors are. Romance changes. At 25, let's go somewhere beautiful. At 70, is there parking? At 25, let's stay up all night. At 70, why? At 25, let's have champagne. At 70, do they have decaf? At 25, I love candlelight. At 70, turn on the lights. I can't see anything. My wife and I used to go out dancing. Now we go out for dinner and discuss whether the chairs are comfortable. That's romance. We went to a restaurant recently. The hostess said, do you have a reservation? My wife said, yes. The hostess said, for 2? My wife said, yes. I said, unless you know something I don't. My wife kicked me under the table. The waiter came. "Can I get you something to drink?" I said, "Water." My wife said, "Wine." I looked at her. She looked at me. She said, "What?" I said, "Nothing." She said, "Good." The waiter asked, "Red or white?" My wife said, "Red." I said, "That's fine." She smiled. I said, "See? I'm learning." After 42 years, I've developed survival skills. One of them is knowing when not to speak. Another is knowing that do whatever you want does not mean do whatever you want. That's a trap. My wife once said, "Do whatever you want." I said, "Okay." She said, "Really?" I said, "You said." "I know what I said." "So?" She said, "Nothing." I said, "Nothing?" She said, "Go ahead." I said, "I'm going to watch football." "Fine." I turned on the game. She went upstairs. 5 minutes later, "Frank?" "Yes." "Did you remember we were going somewhere?" I said, "No." She said, "I told you." "When?" "Yesterday." I said, "I was working yesterday." She said, "You're not working now." I said, "Exactly." She said, "You're impossible." I said, "I've been practicing." She laughed. Marriage after 70 is different. You don't fight about big things anymore. You fight about thermostat settings. She wants 72. I want 68. She says, "It's cold." I say, "It's supposed to be cold." She says, "No, it's not." I say, "It's winter." She says, "I don't care." I say, "Then why do we have a thermostat?" She says, "To keep us comfortable." I say, "I'm comfortable." She says, "I'm not." I say, "Then you change it." She says, "You're closer." That's marriage. The thermostat is never about temperature. It's about power. I've learned not to touch it. I have a system. If my wife is cold, I give her a blanket. If I'm hot, I open a window. If she notices the window, I say, "I thought you opened it." Survival. I'm 70. I have grandchildren. I have retirement income. I have a smartwatch. I have a smart refrigerator. But my wife is still the smartest device in the house. And unlike the refrigerator, she doesn't need Wi-Fi. I remember when going to the grocery store meant buying groceries. Now it's a financial event. I went with my wife last week. She said, "We just need a few things." I said, "Okay." We walked in. Milk, bread, eggs, fine. Then she put something in the cart. I said, "What is that?" "It's on sale." "Do we need it?" "No." "Then why are we buying it?" "Because it's on sale." I said, "That doesn't make sense." She said, "It was $6, now it's $4. I said, "So we spent $4 to save $2. She looked at me. I looked at her. She said, "Don't start." I didn't. I know when I'm outnumbered. The grocery store has become a psychological experiment. You walk in thinking, "I'll spend $50. You leave thinking, "What happened?" I bought 6 things. The receipt was $143. I looked at it. I said, "Did we buy a refrigerator?" My wife said, "No." "Then why is it $143? Prices." I said, "Everything costs more." She said, "I know." I remember when a dollar could buy something. Now a dollar is basically an apology. The cashier says, "That'll be $87.43. I hand over my card. The machine asks, "Would you like cash back?" I say, "From whom?" I want money back, not points. Not rewards. Money. The screen asks, "Would you like to round up to support a charity?" I say, "I'd like to round down to support Frank." The cashier laughs. I say, "I'm serious." Then there's the tip screen. You buy a coffee, $4.50. The machine says, 18%/20%/25%. I say, what did they do? They poured coffee. I say, I appreciate the coffee. But 25%? I didn't hire them to remodel my kitchen. Then the machine turns around and asks, would you like to leave a custom tip? I say, yes. The cashier says, how much? I say, 0. Silence. That's uncomfortable. The machine should have a button, I'm already doing my best. I'd press that. I don't blame young people. They're paying too much too. My son told me, Dad, everything is expensive. I said, welcome to adulthood. He said, do you have any advice? I said, yes. What? Don't open the electric bill. He laughed. I said, seriously. The electric company doesn't send a bill anymore. They send a warning. Your payment is due. I know. I can see the number. It's large enough to have its own zip code. Then there's the internet bill, cable, phone, streaming, cloud storage. Everything is monthly. I don't own anything anymore. I subscribe to my own life. I told my wife, we're paying for 12 streaming services. She said, we watch them. I said, do we? Yes. When? Sometimes. How much is sometimes? She didn't answer. That's because sometimes costs $180 a month, and every service has a different password. My wife writes passwords down, on paper, then loses the paper. I have passwords in my phone, then I forget my phone password. So now I'm locked out of the thing that contains the password to unlock the thing. Technology has created a circle. I call my daughter. What's my password? Which one? My phone. Which password? The password to the phone. What phone? My phone. What model? I don't know. Dad, I need help. She comes over, touches the screen, fixes it. I say, how did you do that? She says, you had it on airplane mode. I say, why? You turned it on. I didn't. You did. I say, maybe the phone did. She says, phones don't do that. I say, then why does mine? She looks at me. I look at her. She says, Dad. I say, never mind. I've learned that when technology wins, you leave the room. My doctor asked, what are you doing for exercise? I said, I walk. How often? Every day. How far? From the living room to the kitchen. He stared at me. I said, sometimes the garage. He didn't laugh. Doctors have terrible timing. He said, you need 30 minutes of moderate exercise. I said, every day? Yes. I said, is there a pill? No. Are you sure? Yes. Have you looked? He smiled. I said, I'm trying to help science. My wife was sitting beside me. She said, I've been telling him. The doctor nodded. I said, why did you bring her? My wife said, because you don't listen. I said, I listen. She said, when? I said, sometimes. The doctor laughed. Now every doctor's appointment feels like a performance review. How are you sleeping? Fine. How's your diet? Fine. Exercise? Fine. Stress? Fine. My wife. No. I said, why did you say no? She said, because you're not fine. The doctor looked at her. I said, don't encourage her. She said, he eats too much cheese. I said, that's private. The doctor said, how much cheese? I said, why are we discussing this? My wife said, too much. I said, there is no such thing as too much cheese. The doctor said, there is. I looked at him. I said, whose side are you on? The older you get, the more people have opinions about what you eat. When you're young, eat something. At 70, don't eat that. I say, pick a position. Then comes the blood pressure machine. It squeezes your arm. I hate that thing. It feels like someone is trying to punish you for having a pulse. The nurse says, relax. I'm thinking, you are squeezing my arm. She says, take a deep breath. I take one. The machine gets tighter. I say, I'm trying. Then the scale. I don't like the scale. The scale has become judgmental. I step on. It says, please wait. I say, I know. It says, please remain still. I say, I am. It says, calculating. I say, take your time. Then the number appears. I look at it. I say, that can't be right. The nurse says, it is. I say, is the scale calibrated? Yes. I say, against what? She laughs. I don't. I have a relationship with that scale. It lies. I know it lies. Then my smartwatch says, congratulations, you've completed 1,000 steps. I say, thank you. It says, your daily goal is 8,000. I say, don't ruin this moment. I have never understood why technology celebrates you and insults you in the same sentence. Congratulations! Then, you're still not doing enough. That's not encouragement. That's parenting. My watch is my mother. I also have a sleep tracker. It tells me how badly I slept. I don't need to know. I was there. I woke up 6 times. I remember. The watch says, your sleep quality was poor. I say, thank you. I know. Then it gives me suggestions. Try reducing screen time before bed. I say, maybe reduce notifications before bed. Maintain a consistent bedtime. I say, I am 70. My bedtime is whenever I want. Limit caffeine. I say, now you're getting personal. My wife says, listen to it. I say, I'm surrounded. At 70, you don't need a smartwatch. You need a watch that says, you made it through another day. Good job. That's the technology I want. I still drive. My wife says, I think you should let me drive. I say, why? You're too cautious. I say, that's the first time anyone has complained about that. She says, you drive 10 miles under the speed limit. I say, I'm enjoying retirement. She says, everyone behind you isn't. I don't care. When you're 70, you're not racing anybody. I drive like my groceries are glass. Because sometimes they are. Modern cars have too many buttons. My first car had steering wheel, brakes, gas, radio. That's it. You knew what everything did. Today, lane assist, blind spot monitoring, collision warning, adaptive cruise, parking sensors, cameras, voice commands. The car has more opinions than my wife. I start the engine. The car says, driver attention required. I say, I'm here. It says, please keep your eyes on the road. I say, I'm looking. My wife says, Frank, don't argue with the car. I say, it started. Then the car says, turn left in 500 feet. I say, okay. My wife says, turn left. I say, I heard it. She says, then why aren't you turning? Because I'm driving. Turn. I know. Frank! I know! We turn. Silence. She says, you missed it. I say, no. You did. The GPS recalculated. Because you missed it. I say, the GPS changed its mind. That's what I tell myself. My neighbors are another story. When you're young, you don't know your neighbors. When you're older, you know everything. My neighbor knows when I leave, when I come home, when I cut the grass. when I don't cut the grass. He said, "Frank, haven't seen you mowing." I said, "I retired." He said, "From mowing?" "No." He laughed. I said, "From work." He said, "Oh." I said, "I'm enjoying life." He said, "You've got weeds." There it was, retirement judgment. I said, "That's not a weed." "What is it?" "Wildlife." He laughed. I told him, "I'm letting nature grow." He said, "Your wife won't like that." I said, "She doesn't." He said, "Then mow." I said, "You're not helping." I also discovered something about retirement. Everybody suddenly has advice. How are you spending your time? Why aren't you traveling? You should get a hobby. You should exercise. You should volunteer. You should learn something. You should stay active. I say, should I retire from retirement? My neighbor told me, "You need a hobby." I said, "I have one." "What?" "Not doing things." He laughed. I said, "I'm serious. The older I get, the more I appreciate doing nothing." Young people are terrified of silence. They always have a phone, music, television, podcast, something. I sit on my porch. No phone, no television, just coffee. My wife comes out. She says, "What are you doing?" "Listening." "To what?" "Nothing." She says, "That's not a sound." I say, "It is." She sits down. We listen. Birds, wind, cars, a dog, nothing. After 5 minutes, she says, "You know what?" "What?" "I like this." I say, "See?" She says, "Don't get used to it." I laugh. That's the good part of getting older. You start appreciating quiet. Not because life became boring, because life finally became loud enough. My wife said, "We should take a family vacation." I said, "Sounds great." She said, "Everybody is coming." I said, "That's not what I heard." She said, "The kids." "Okay." "Grandchildren." "Okay." "Their partners." I paused. "How many people?" She counted. I said, "That's not a vacation." She said, "What is it?" "A conference." We rented a big house. I thought, this will be nice. It wasn't. There were phones everywhere. My grandson woke up. First question, "What's the Wi-Fi?" I said, "Good morning to you too." "What's the password?" "Talk to your grandmother." He did. She gave it to him. I said, "When I was your age, we didn't have Wi-Fi." He said, "What did you do?" "Went outside." "What did you do outside?" "Whatever we wanted." He thought. "Without internet?" "Yes." "How?" I said, "We survived." He laughed. I told him, "Your grandmother and I used to go on vacation without GPS." He said, "How did you find places?" "Maps." "Paper maps?" "Yes." "That's crazy." I said, "You know what's crazy?" "What?" "Your grandmother and I drove across 3 states using one map." He said, "What if you got lost?" I said, "We argued." He laughed. "Who was right?" I said, "Your grandmother." "Even if you were right?" I said, "Especially then." That's something nobody tells you about marriage. You can be correct and still be wrong. We went sightseeing. My wife wanted to walk. I asked, "How far?" She said, "Not far." That phrase should be illegal. Not far means you will regret wearing those shoes. We walked and walked and walked. My wife said, "Isn't this beautiful?" "Yes." "Worth it?" "Ask me when we get back." We finally reached the destination. It was beautiful. I said, "Okay." She said, "Okay, what?" "It was worth it." She smiled. Then, "Let's keep going." I said, "Where?" "There's another place." I said, "Of course there is." At 70, vacations become a negotiation between your wife and your knees. Then dinner. The family went to a restaurant. The waiter handed us menus. My grandson opened his phone. I said, "Put that away." He said, "I'm looking at the menu." I looked at my menu. He looked at his phone. I said, "It's right here." He said, "I want to see the reviews." I said, "We're already inside." He said, "I want to know what people think." I said, "People outside the restaurant." "Yes." I said, "We're inside." He laughed. That's the world now. Nobody trusts their own decision. They need reviews. 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars. Great food, terrible parking. Wonderful service, expensive. Nice atmosphere, small portions. I say, just eat. Then came the bill. Everyone became very quiet. That's a family tradition. Before the bill, let's get dessert. After the bill, maybe next time. My wife said, "Frank, you okay?" I said, "I'm fine." She said, "You look pale." I said, "I'm calculating." She laughed. I said, "Dinner used to cost money. Now? Now dinner costs a memory." The vacation ended. Everybody went home. The house became quiet. My wife and I sat down. She said, "Wasn't that wonderful?" I said, "Yes." "Would you do it again?" I looked at her. I said, "Ask me next year." She laughed. Then I said, "You know what?" "What?" "I actually miss them." She smiled. "Me too." That's family. You can spend 7 days saying, "Why is everyone here?" Then the moment they leave, "Why is everyone gone?" That's how you know you're getting old. You don't want the house full, but you don't want it empty either. You want them close enough to visit and far enough away to sleep. That's the perfect distance. People my age love saying, "Things were better back then." I say it too, but sometimes I think we're lying. We didn't have smartphones, true. We also didn't have smartphones telling us where the nearest bathroom was. That was useful. We didn't have GPS, true. We also didn't have GPS telling us, recalculating. We didn't have streaming, true. We had 3 television channels. 3. If nothing was on, nothing was on. You couldn't complain. You just sat there. We didn't have online shopping. If you wanted something, you went to the store. If they didn't have it, you went home. Nobody delivered it to your door at 10:43 at night. We didn't have Amazon. We had catalogs. You'd order something, wait 6 weeks. Then the box arrived. You opened it. It was the wrong size. You didn't return it. You lived with it. That's character building. We didn't have texting. If you wanted to talk to somebody, you called. If they didn't answer, you called again. Then you waited. Today you send, "Hey." They don't answer. You send, "Everything okay?" Still nothing. Then, "Did you see my message?" Now you've become the FBI. We didn't have social media. We had neighbors. If you wanted gossip, you walked outside. Faster, more accurate. And there was no algorithm. Your neighbor was the algorithm. She knew everything. "Did you hear?" "No." "Well," and you're trapped for 40 minutes. We didn't have fitness trackers. We had chores. You wanted exercise? Mow the lawn, carry groceries, wash the car, clean the garage. Now people buy watches to tell them to stand up. My watch buzzes. Time to move. I look at it. I say, "I moved yesterday." It doesn't care. Technology has changed. But here's what hasn't changed. People still want the same things. They want somebody to love. They want their family to be okay. They want enough money to feel secure. They want to be healthy. They want to laugh. They want somebody to call. And they want to know where they put their glasses. That's life. The details change. The important things don't. I remember my father. He didn't have much, but he knew how to fix things. He could fix a radio, a car, a door, a chair, anything. I asked him once, "Dad, how do you know how to fix everything?" He said, "You try." That's how we learned. There were no tutorials, no YouTube, no AI. You just tried. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes you made it worse. Then you tried again. I think that's what getting older teaches you. You don't know everything. You just know that most problems can be survived. A bad day, a bad decision, a broken appliance, a missed turn, a difficult year, a ridiculous bill, a family argument. You get through it. Then one day you're 70 and you're sitting on the porch with the person you married and you realize you made it. Not perfectly, not elegantly, but you made it. My wife and I have been married 42 years. 42. That's longer than most of my appliances, and some of them were very expensive. We have argued, a lot. We have disagreed, a lot. We've had good years, hard years, funny years, strange years, years where money was tight, years where the children needed us, years where we needed each other. And somehow, we're still here. She still steals my blanket. I still leave cabinets open. She still tells me what to do. I still pretend not to hear her. And every morning, she still makes coffee. That's love. Not the movie kind. The real kind. The kind that says, "Did you take your keys? Where are your glasses? Did you lock the door? Did you eat? Call me when you get there." It doesn't sound romantic, but after 42 years, it is. When I retired, I thought the biggest change would be having more time. It wasn't. The biggest change was realizing how much time I had been missing. When you're working, you think, after Friday, then after this project, then after the holidays, then after the kids grow up, then after retirement. And suddenly, you're 70. You look around. You think, wait, this is the after. This is the life I was waiting for. And it's strange, because you discover that retirement isn't about doing nothing. It's about finally deciding what matters. Some days I do nothing, and I don't feel guilty. Some days I fix something. Some days I break something while trying to fix it. Some days my children call. Some days my grandchildren visit. Some days my wife and I go somewhere. Some days we stay home. Sometimes we argue about the thermostat. Sometimes we sit quietly. Sometimes she asks, "What are you thinking?" I say, "Nothing." She says, "You're always thinking about nothing." I say, "I'm retired." She smiles. The other day my grandson called. "Grandpa?" "Yeah?" "Can you help me?" "With what?" "My phone." I laughed. "What happened?" "I forgot my password." I said, "Welcome to adulthood." He said, "Grandpa." I said, "What's the password?" He told me. I said, "That doesn't work." He said, "Why?" "Because you gave me the wrong password." "Oh." I said, "Try again." He did. It worked. He said, "Thanks, Grandpa." I said, "No problem." He hung up. I sat there, and I smiled. My wife asked, "What?" I said, "Nothing." She said, "You're smiling." I know. "Why?" "My grandson needed me." She smiled. "That's nice." I said, "Yeah." Then my daughter called. "Dad?" "Yes?" Are you busy? I looked at my wife. She looked at me. I said, no. She smiled. My daughter said, "Can you come over?" I said, "Sure." "What are you doing?" I looked around. Nothing. She laughed. I got my keys. My wife said, "Where are you going?" To help her. With what? I don't know. She smiled. Take your jacket. I don't need it. Take it. Okay. Your phone. I have it. Your glasses. I have them. Your wallet. I have it. Your keys. I checked my pocket. I didn't have them. I looked at her. She smiled. See? I said, "That's why I married you." She said, "No." What? You married me because I was beautiful. I said, "That too." She laughed. I found my keys. I opened the door. Then my watch buzzed. "Stand up and move." I looked at it. I said, "I'm already moving." It buzzed again. "You have been inactive." I said, "I'm retired." My wife laughed. I walked outside. The car said, "Driver attention required." I said, "I haven't even started." My phone buzzed. My daughter texted, "Dad, can you bring the screwdriver?" I looked at my wife. She said, "What?" I said, "I'm working again." She laughed. I got the screwdriver. I got into the car. The GPS said, "Turn left." I turned left. It said, "Recalculating." I said, "Don't start." I drove to my daughter's house. She opened the door. "Dad!" "What's wrong?" "The cabinet door came off." I looked at it. I said, "That's it?" "Yes." I grabbed the screwdriver. I fixed it. She hugged me. "Thanks, Dad." I said, "No problem." My grandson came into the room. "Grandpa!" "What?" "Can you look at my computer?" I looked at my daughter. She smiled. I said, "Sure." I sat down. My grandson handed me the laptop. I looked at the screen. I didn't understand anything. I pressed the power button. Nothing. I pressed it again. Nothing. I said, "What's wrong with it?" He said, "It won't turn on." I looked at the charger. It wasn't plugged in. I plugged it in. The computer turned on. My grandson said, "Wow." I said, "That's why they call me." My daughter laughed. My wife texted, "Don't be too long." I texted, "Why?" She answered, "I need you to help me with the garage." I stared at the message. I said, "Of course." My daughter laughed. "What?" I said, "I retired." She said, "I know." I said, "Apparently nobody else did." She hugged me again. I smiled. And suddenly I understood. Maybe retirement isn't about becoming useless. Maybe it's about becoming available for the things that actually matter. Not every day, not every hour, not every request. But when your family calls, you can answer. When your wife needs help, you can help. When your grandson doesn't understand something, you can sit beside him. When your daughter needs a cabinet fixed, you bring the screwdriver. And when everyone leaves, you sit on the porch, drink coffee, watch the sunset, and think, I worked 46 years to get here. Then my wife comes outside. She says, "Frank?" "Yeah?" "Did you take the trash out?" I close my eyes. I say, "I just retired." She says, "You retired 20 years ago." I open my eyes. "That's not true." She says, "You retired last month." "Oh." She smiles. "Trash?" I stand up. My knees crack. My back cracks. My shoulder cracks. I say, "I'm fine." She says, "I didn't ask." I walk toward the garage. The smart lights come on. The refrigerator beeps. My watch buzzes. My phone buzzes. The garage door opens. I stop. I look at all of it. I say, "You know what?" My wife says, "What?" "I think the house is trying to manage me." She laughs. I point at the refrigerator. "It started with that thing." She says, "Frank, it's a refrigerator. It knows too much." "How?" "It knows when I eat cheese." She laughs. The refrigerator beeps again. I point. "See?" My wife shakes her head. I take the trash outside. I put it at the curb. I stand there. The neighborhood is quiet. The sun is going down. My wife stands beside me. I look at her. 42 years. I say, "You know what?" "What?" "I think I like retirement." She smiles. "Really?" "Yes." "Why?" I look around. "My own schedule." She laughs. "Your own schedule?" "Yes." "What did you do today?" I think. "I helped our daughter." "Anything else?" "Fixed the computer." "Anything else?" "Did the trash." "Anything else?" I think. "I drank coffee." She smiles. "And?" I look at her. "And I spent the day with people I love." She puts her hand on my arm. "That's retirement." I say, "No." "What?" "That's life." She smiles. We stand there quietly. Then my phone buzzes. I look at it. A notification. "Your screen time this week is up 14%. I stare at the phone. My wife says, "What is it?" I say, "My phone is disappointed in me." She laughs. I put the phone away. My watch buzzes. I take it off. My wife says, "What are you doing?" "Retiring." I put the watch on the table. The phone stays in my pocket. The refrigerator can't reach me outside. The television isn't asking if I'm still watching. The GPS isn't telling me where to go. Nobody is sending me a password. Nobody needs me to fix a printer. Nobody is asking me to reset Wi-Fi. Nobody is telling me to exercise. Nobody is telling me what I should eat. Nobody is telling me to stand up. I'm standing. I'm 70. I'm tired. I'm happy. And for once, nobody is asking me to do anything. My wife looks at me. She smiles. Then she says, "Frank?" I say, "Yes?" "Tomorrow, can you clean the garage?" I stare at her. She laughs. I say, "Of course." She says, "Good." I say, "But I have one condition." "What?" "I get to choose the music." She thinks. "Fine." I smile. "Deal." She walks inside. I follow her. I look at the garage. I look at the 12-page list. I look at my screwdriver. I look at my retirement watch sitting on the table. And I realize, maybe this is what retirement really is. Not freedom from responsibility. Not freedom from work. Not freedom from family. It's freedom to choose which things are worth your time. And after 70 years, I finally learned the difference. I don't need a bigger house. I don't need a faster car. I don't need another television. I don't need a smarter refrigerator. I don't need artificial intelligence. I don't need 20 streaming services. I don't need a fitness watch yelling at me. I don't need to prove anything. I just need coffee, a comfortable chair, a little peace, a good laugh, and the woman who's been telling me what to do for 42 years. My wife walks into the kitchen. She says, "Frank?" "Yes?" "Do you want coffee?" I smile. "Yes." "Cream?" "Yes." "Sugar?" "Yes." She hands me the cup. I take it. I say, "Thank you." She smiles. I take a sip. Perfect. Then she says, After coffee, can you fix the sink? I close my eyes. I say, absolutely. She laughs. I look at the audience. I say, you see? I didn't retire. I just got transferred to a department with better coffee. Pause. And no vacation days. The audience laughs. I take another sip. Then I look at my wife. She says, what? I say, nothing. She says, you're smiling again. I say, I'm happy. She smiles. Good. I say, after 42 years. She waits. I say, I finally figured out the secret to a long marriage. What? I point at my coffee. Keep your cup full. Then I point toward the garage. And keep your mouth shut. She laughs. I laugh. The audience laughs. I stand up. My knees crack. My back cracks. My shoulder cracks. I look at the audience. I say, that's not an injury. Pause. That's my body giving me a standing ovation. Good night. I'm Frank. And if you're over 60, don't worry. You're not getting old. You're just becoming an expert at taking longer to get where you were already going. And tomorrow, I'll be in the garage. Because apparently, retirement has a dress code. And mine is old jeans, comfortable shoes, and absolutely no idea where my glasses are. Good night.